Welcome, dear listener, to a journey through the shadows of the night, where the line between the living and the undead are blurred. Wander with me through our deep dive into the macabre history of horror cinema throughout the ages and the ghouls who made them. I'm your host, Joey the Ghoul, and you're listening to Icons from the Shadows. Tune in every month and be sure to follow us on Spotify, TikTok, and our Instagram page at Ghouls of the Night, spelled Nite. I'm joined by our first guest, Bill Daly, who you will also hear throughout today's episode. Today, we are covering Dracula, released in 1931, directed by Todd Browning, written by Garrett Fort, starring Bela Lugosi as Dracula, Helen Chandler as Mina, David Manners as Jonathan Harker, Dwight Fry as Renfield, Edward Van Sloan as Van Helsing, and Herbert Bunston as Dr. Seward. Dracula is considered to be the original vampire film and is credited for launching the horror genre. I'd like to take this time to tell you why. Do you remember the first time you watched Dracula?
Oh man, I must have been in grammar school at the time.
Grammar
when I saw
school? What? Okay.
Well, you see, Mego came out with these Universal Monster action figures,
Okay,
and
yeah.
that was before the Star Wars figures would come out, right?
Oh, okay, yeah.
And I was into the all that film history stuff. I had Dracula, Frankenstein, Wolfman, The Mummy, and sure, yeah, I remember watching that the first time.
My
And
goodness.
as a kid, you don't quite pick up on all the real deep lore and macabre elements. I mean, it's your first taste of it, but wow, I mean, the quintessential Dracula. I mean,
Absolutely.
he established the look that
yeah.
carries on throughout today.
You want to know the funniest thing? I watched Dracula this weekend, and I
Mhm.
was kind of looking back on it, just being like, man, like everyone knows this man as like this. When you think of a vampire, that's the face you look at, right? So I'm looking at his face, and I'm going, why doesn't he have any teeth? And he does not have teeth.
No fangs.
He has no fangs. Fangs didn't show up until I forget which year.
Till
but it's
Hamner?
Christopher Lee's.
Hammer films.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those ones. Yep. That wasn't like popularized until then, which kind of surprised me a little bit, you know?
Yet they could still show the two puncture marks on
Yeah.
a neck
Uh-huh.
in some cases.
Yeah.
You know.
Bram Stoker's haunting tale of Dracula, written in 1897, was somewhat infamously adapted to the silver screen by a German expressionist filmmaker, F.W. Murnau, with 1922's Nosferatu. Despite the name changes, the silent film follows the same beats as the book, and due to quote-unquote misunderstandings regarding the copyright laws, neither Murnau or the production company Prana Films had acquired the rights to the story. It was Mrs. Florence Stoker, Bram Stoker's wife, who actually sued the production company for copyright infringement, resulting in all copies of the film being destroyed. We now know that a few copies of the film survived its unceremonious purge, but before 1931, Bram Stoker's Dracula was yet to officially be translated to film, and what is considered to be its most defining adaptation was yet to come. But sunlight doesn't actually hurt him. He
He just needs to kind of stay in the shadows
He
a
just
little
stays-
bit, like Gary Oldman did, in their version.
No, in this version, he could stand all the way out in the
Oh,
sun.
wow.
It was all psychological to him. He was like, I'm doing this because I think it's gonna hurt me. So
Sounds
it does.
like me in my party days.
Exactly.
Oh man.
But yeah, that Dracula series, I think that's actually the series that got me saying, all right, I want to read the book and then I want to watch the original movie.
Well, let me
know?
tell you where I'm getting my Dracula Jones fix
Tell me.
nowadays. It's got to be Hulu's What We Do in the Shadows.
It's so good.
Yeah.
I just got into it recently, and it's the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life.
And then besides just your normal everyday run-of-the-mill blood-sucking vampires, they also have a roommate who's a energy
Yeah, I
vampire.
know.
He sucks the energy out of the room with his inaneness. It's just incredible.
You know what my favorite piece from that show is? It's the scene. I think it's one of the opening they have an opening clip.
Yeah.
It's the opening scene where they drink the blood of a bunch of hippies.
Uh-huh.
And then, so it's what's his name?
You had drug blood? You drank drug
He's all-
blood?
he goes, we drink the blood of some peoples, but the people were on drugs.
Ah, yeah.
And now I'm a wizard.
That was, I think, that wasn't Laszlo. That was
Not Leslie.
Nar something.
Oh my god, I can't remember. Why are we forgetting names today?
I think we might have Bongsimers.
I think so. You might, yeah, a little bit. Oh, but yeah, that's
Nandor. Nandor,
Nandor.
the destroyer.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
I think Laszlo is one of. I just love his joie de vivre, his sort of Laszlo, the, that English chap, because he's all about the sex, and I like that about him.
Oh my God, he's on New York City.
Yeah.
It just such an. It's proof that that genre, the horror genre, the
Yeah.
vampire genre,
Mhm.
is still alive and well.
Oh
and
yeah,
that it's definitely
a fertile bed for exploration.
absolutely.
Yeah, you
and
can
I
do so
love
much
too
different
that,
stuff with it.
and I love too, especially with the story like Dracula's, how much room for interpretation there is. I love that the fact that this series, this franchise, is the grandfather of horror now. You know, it's a lot of movies, so many movies, including some of the stuff that I've even made, are informed by this staple. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? 1931's Dracula didn't scare me, not because like I was already grown, you know, so it was kind
Yeah.
of hard to scare me. But I will say this: that there is definitely something eerily dark that really makes you think about these types of movies. Like, man, this must have freaked people the fuck out.
Well, it's definitely worth
You know?
a rewatch,
Absolutely.
especially if you saw as a kid and then you become an adult
Oh yeah.
and you can use your adult brain to
I love
really
I
enjoy
love
it. Yeah.
doing that when you
Mhm.
watch a movie from childhood
Yeah.
and you come back with adult brain and it's like there's so many
Wow, that's why they
details and
did
things
that.
you missed from
Oh,
before.
yeah.
It's like, oh, that's what they were talking about. Oh, that's why he did that, you know.
Not only was 1931's Dracula the first authorized film adaptation, it was also the first sound adaptation as well, or as folks called it back then, talkies. This production of blood and death paved the way for what was called the Universal Pictures Monsterverse, simultaneously creating a new genre for moviegoers in the US, the horror film. The horror genre is still going strong 9 decades later, countless subgenres, and it has the team behind Dracula to thank for it. The challenges of making the movie is a story of legend, much like the film itself. The film was produced during a period of historical and economic depression, while also being plagued with personal tragedy and an endless search for the man who would forever be known as Dracula.
That look really started to develop early on stage.
Really?
When and
That's right,
and
it was a Broadway
Broadway.
show,
It was
yeah.
a Broadway show, and Bela was a stage actor when he came from Germany. That was his last European post.
Yeah.
And he pretty much claimed that role like Tim Curry claimed Frankenfurter.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
he became, obviously synonymous with
Yeah.
it.
He also kind of had a raw deal though. So as I was learning like today, Bela Lugosi had a really crap contract with the studio. You know, he was paid the minimal amount of work because he was a brand new actor on the scene. You know, he what was that? What was that? There's a part in the article where they're talking about his his work that he took work because he couldn't get anywhere else, and he was like, "Well, I'm kind of desperate for the money."
And
And,
the
like-
studios knew he was
Yeah.
desperate, and they took advantage of him
Exactly.
because of that
Yep.
fact. He lived beyond his means. He wanted to, and in
He
essence,
wanted that movie star status.
He wanted to be that aristocrat.
Yeah.
Those clothes,
Yeah.
all of the drapings that come along with, that come along with it.
One of the most well-dressed characters in cinema.
I mean,
know.
he was paid a quarter of what Boris Karloff was paid in a later film,
I found out too that they wanted him for Frankenstein originally.
and he turned it down.
yeah, and he literally.
Well, the role at the time when he saw it was a nothing role, and
Mm-hmm.
certainly when Boris got it, it was nothing at that point too. But it took that director and Boris to sort of develop that character
Yeah.
into what would have been a good role for Bela at the time.
would have been amazing, honestly.
Yeah.
Just to go back for a second, when I first got introduced to Dracula, it wasn't even the movie; it was the book. So I knew, like, obviously, I didn't watch vintage horror until like a couple years ago, maybe like vintage horror, because I never had access to it, But now that I do, before I ever watched the movie, the 1931 movie, I got to read the book, and it's hard for me to read books in general, just because
Yeah.
like I don't like I have like a terrible attention span, but this book had me gripped from start to finish. Specifically, I don't know if you read it before, right?
Well, it starts off as a series of journals,
Yeah.
letters, found documents that sort of piece this whole thing
Yep.
together.
In those journals is what freaked me out the most. It's the chapter where he meets the brides of Dracula.
Oh,
You know what I'm talking about? Where it's like there's this poor lady who's like outside the gates of the castle banging on, like, give me back my child, give me back my child. And then Dracula sends wolves after this poor woman. while the brides are eating the baby standing over Jonathan Harker, just chewing on, he's just quietly there like, oh God.
Oh, you just couldn't get that past the
No.
codes
No.
that time.
You
I mean,
couldn't.
and in fact, I mean, in the original, I believe Lucy kind of goes off on her own, and she is a an infanticidal baby killing vampire.
Which I found out that there was a lot of scenes cut from her role.
exactly. You could
So
only
in the movie,
allude to that.
yeah, you can only sort of allude to it. They kind of have. There's like some doctor guys reading it in
It was
a newspaper.
It was the you used to call him a screw. He's the guy the guy that keeps the inmates in the asylum.
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
orderly.
The orderly, yeah.
He's reading the newspaper. Oh, blimey! It's another baby's been eaten up over there.
Literally. Oh man.
Yeah. So let's talk about Renfield, because him eating those flies and just going manic and crazy. Did you get a chance to watch the Spanish version of the film
I
yet?
did not get a
'Cause
chance, but I'm
I've heard
dying to watch
That
it.
the actor playing the Renfield there brought it to another level of manic and crazy.
Really?
And if manic and crazy what drew you in with the English version,
Yeah.
then it's definitely worth a watch to see
Oh,
that Spanish
goodness,
actor
okay.
on there.
Yeah, I saw bits and pieces of it through the a documentary that I was checking out that you recommended to me, and I could not help but notice the cinematography, the quality of it. You know what I mean?
Well,
It's like-
yeah, absolutely.
It's like
they got the cheat.
I wish. Yeah, I kind of wish the two movies went hand in hand with one another, because if you blended those, depending with the actors or whatever.
Well, who says that can't be done now?
Probably.
I
I know.
it's,
A
in a few,
supercut.
in a few years it will be in the public domain, I'd imagine. But
That's
could
gonna
you?
be exciting.
Yeah. Well, the Spanish production had the benefit of being able to watch all the rushes.
Mhm.
They were able to see what worked and what didn't work. They took advantage of other parts of the set that they didn't even use. And they used a lot more sort of camera movement and panning and zooming in and things that they just sort of... You'll notice when you watch the English version, it's a bit more of a theatric stage production.
Yeah.
Because Universal bought the rights not only to Bram Stoker's original Dracula, but to all of the stage productions that were going on at that time as well.
I also found out that it took Bela Lugosi convincing Bram Stoker's wife before she passed to get the rights to the movie, which I don't know why. Looking back then, I didn't realize that
Wouldn't you like to be a
the
fly on the wall
author,
for that?
yeah, the author Bram Stoker was alive not that long ago before Dracula came out.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Fred, your host of Fractured Mind and Body Podcast. I am here to talk about issues you might face as a person with a disability. I want you to know that you are not alone. I will talk about the good, the bad, and the embarrassing things you might face. I want the public, regular people, to hear our stories and understand what we go through. Have your friends and even your family members tune into Fractured Mind and Body Podcast. I can also be found on Instagram at Fractured Mind and Body. Make sure you put them all lowercase. Hope you tune in to Fractured Mind and Body Podcast to truly know that you are not alone.
Here's a hard pill to swallow for most filmmakers. The horror classic Dracula was actually produced by the then inexperienced 23-year-old son of the Universal Pictures founder Carl Laemmle Sr. Let that sink in for a minute. Carl Laemmle Jr. was born April 28, 1908 in Chicago, Illinois, and bounced around from there to New York City and then finally to Universal City. Some people believe that because of his father's success, he's a regular Nepo baby. But I think differently. See, because Carl Laemmle Jr. grew up in that studio following closely under his father's watch, learning from him and growing and finding out what it takes to be in that kind of a business. Fun fact, everyone including his own son called him Uncle Carl. Carl Laemmle Sr. is who I'm referring to. On Junior's 21st birthday, his father appointed him director and chief of production at Universal, making him in charge of, well, Universal. Damn, nepotism is insane. I take back my original statement. In his time at Universal, he wrote over 30 films and serials and produced more than 100 projects before retiring from Universal entirely. Carl Laemmle Jr. is credited for purchasing the film rights to Bram Stoker's novel for the price of $40,000, and he would later go on to buy the rights to all stage play adaptations as well, making Universal Pictures the sole owner of the Dracula property.
Bela
Dracula
was
came
born
out?
in 1883, I believe.
So he was like, what, 10 or something like
Yeah,
that when
yeah.
Dracula came out?
Mhm.
That's
Is that
That's a
nuts?
trip to think about. They didn't even have silent movies yet when they were doing. Oh my
no,
goodness!
it was all vaudeville and you know the East End and things
Yeah.
like that. And yeah, he was raised in Hungary, obviously. After some political upheaval over there, he went over to Czechoslovakia for a while, and then got to work in Germany. After the Second World War, with all that craziness and the bohemian sort of film industry that was going on over there, and
Yeah.
that's finally moved over to America.
Yeah, and I think too, like, so the censorship, right? Censorship is a big thing that I think the Dracula movies and so like was like 1931 to 36 was kind of the Dracula run essentially without Bela Lugosi somehow.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
Yeah, the bride
And, like,
it was the daughter, or what was it? Dracula's daughter.
It went
They have-
Dracula's daughter,
Mhm.
and then they did the Frankenstein movies. I think
Yeah.
it was Frankenstein meets Wolfman, and Dracula's in it. And then they did House of Frankenstein, House of Dracula.
And did we say Bride of? You mentioned Bride of Frankenstein.
Bride of Frankenstein's in there, but
Yeah.
I'm counting the
Bella's
ones
not
with
in
Bella.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no.
Mhm.
Oh, he plays like a bunch of little side characters. So they would use his name to, like, get the butts and seats. Hey, Bela Lugosi's in this, but then he's only play like
But Bella was in Bride of Frankenstein. He played Igor.
exact. Oh,
He wasn't the Igor. It wasn't Igor, but it was a different.
Isn't it Son of Frankenstein?
Was it Son of Frankenstein? He
It
was
might
in
be
one
Son
of
of
those.
Frankenstein, yeah. It's Son of Frankenstein.
It was-
Yes.
okay.
Because Bride. He was. I think in Bride he was like
And he stole the show. And
he was just an old guy. He's some random old stranger or hobo or something.
All right.
While several writers had already helped with the shape of the script, Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist Louis Bromfield was hired by producers to make Dracula the spectacle it would soon become. Unfortunately, in an attempt to seamlessly combine elements from the novel and the stage play, this award-winning writer was met with multiple structural and logistical issues while trying to remain true to the source material. Many of the writer's ideas were turned down mostly due to budget and controversy surrounding the material. But it's Dracula. What else can you say to that? You know what I mean? That being said, this is what made Louis Bromfield part ways from the movie altogether. First, they lose a very talented writer. Then, the 1929 stock market crashes, starting the Great Depression. And, on top of all of this, their leading man and first choice for Dracula, allegedly, Lon Chaney, suddenly passes away at 47 from throat cancer, forcing Universal to take a huge step back and reevaluate Dracula itself.
Who was also on the original cast on stage with Bella.
Which is
Yeah.
like insane.
Mhm.
But I just, as much as I love the guy who plays Van Helsing, I find it hysterical when he has his confrontation with Dracula and he's like, "Come to me," and he's not listening. He's not like, he's not doing because I'm a man. I'm not scared of you.
Yeah,
whatever.
and he
But
almost-
he's trying to do it, and then he tries to bite him, and he's standing in this pose where he just looks uncomfortable to how he's standing because he's trying to like hold up his like crucifix, and it's like, you loosen the shoulders a little bit, dog, or something, you know.
I think of David Cross at the end of that scene because David Cross always says how funny it is that vampires are like repulsed by reminders. So when Helsing brings that cross up to hold him, I mean it's a real battle of wits there.
Playwright and screenwriter Garrett Ford, best known for his 1929 film Applause, was skilled in blending thriller and humor. He went on to be the final choice for the screenplay of Dracula. Ford, however, was the polar opposite of Bromfield. choosing only to pull inspiration from the stage play and treating the Broadway show as the sole blueprint, meaning the screenplay would deviate heavily from the book. And now, as many historians or even fans of the film will tell you, much of what we associate with Dracula originates from the play, not even the book. But I feel like they probably could have gotten away with a little bit more. You know?
Certainly. I mean, we don't even see Dracula get staked in the end.
Yeah.
We hear an off-camera, "Ooh," on the end there.
Quite anticlimactic for
yeah.
what was considered one of the biggest movies of its time. You know what I mean? The novelty of, holy shit, this is a supernatural-esque being that's coming to,
like
coming
you said,
to the screens.
No teeth, just a few red dots on the neck. There's obviously no mutilation or anything like that.
Yeah.
I don't. The creepiest thing that really were what you would hang out outside your house nowadays as a Halloween bat. I mean, you could totally see, you almost can see the string when it bounced up and down there.
I kind of have a love for
But
that.
I love it.
For that now.
Absolutely.
Like I would absolutely 1000% watch a movie in the modern day in the style of old school vintage horror with the wires that you can clearly see or the fake body dummies that you can throw off a bridge, just because there's something
there's atmosphere.
It's the atmosphere. The
Absolutely.
atmosphere, exactly. That's exactly what I was
You've got
thinking.
time. The pacing allows you to soak up that atmosphere, the ambiance, the staging. You really appreciate it, as opposed to, say, a Marvel or a DC film where it's so just boom, 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 boom.
It's got to fit this mold, this structure. Yeah.
You want to, I guess you'll have to want to watch it 2 or 3 times if you want to catch everything, if you really liked it. And that's fine for some people.
Yeah.
But
I would also say I kind of appreciate the fact that the Dracula franchise, the Frankenstein franchise, and all of those productions were essentially that era's Marvel DC movies. You know what I mean?
It certainly
they wanted
was.
tie-ins and spin-offs and
Lunchboxes.
This and
I'm sure they had lunchboxes.
Oh,
but-
I got one recently. I bought me like an old school, like tin lunchbox with like Frankenstein on it. Edward Van Sloan had already played the role of Abraham Van Helsing with Bela Lugosi on Broadway, and was the natural choice to play Van Helsing according to Lammel and Browning. While this role is considered to be his most popular performance, Edward Van Sloan was never really a fan of the finished product, accusing the film of being overplayed and overwritten. Edward Van Sloan was also a theater kid, clearly. Bernard Jukes, the stage actor alongside Lugosi and Sloan, also fought to join the film's cast as Renfield, reprising his role from the stage to the screen, but was eventually beat out by Dwight Fry. On par with Lugosi and Fry's portrayal, it would go on to define the character. And unfortunately, at least at the time, Fry fell victim to typecasting just like his fellow co-stars. I don't know what the deal is with old Hollywood and typecasting, but it's the most insane practice for a business to limit such incredible talent to archetypes. Shortly after the release of the movie, Bela Lugosi turned down the opportunity to return to the role on stage. He was quoted as saying, "I never want to hear that name Dracula again." It's insane. Of course, at the time, Bela Lugosi did not understand the cultural impact his role would have on the future generations of cinema, and later in his life would come to appreciate his dark persona. Despite the misconception that Lugosi would go on to play the role multiple times, the eclectic thespian would only portray Dracula on screen twice in his entire career. Personally, I count where he's portrayed as a vampire, just not Dracula. It wasn't until 1948 that Bela Lugosi made his second and final reprisal of Count Dracula in the universal horror comedy Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Following the death of the Count in 1956, Lugosi would go on to be buried in one of his black silk replica capes, at the request of his family, of course. The original cape, one of the Lugosi's most prized possessions, had been well preserved and went on auction in 2011 for $1.5 million. If I was a millionaire, that's the first thing I'd buy, I'm just saying. After it failed to sell, it was donated to the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures. Fun fact, most people think the inside of Dracula's cape has a red lining, but it's actually more along the lines of beige, because red wouldn't have been picked up in a black and white film. I've read the book before, and I can confidently say that while Lugosi does not match the physical description of the book, he definitely embodies the predatory nature and hypnotic charisma that comes with the character to a T. Despite the criticism from peers and even fellow castmates, Bela Lugosi's performance of Count Dracula is a timeless classic that still holds to the test of time over and over again. He is polite. He is shy. He is vain. He is larger than life. He is an actor, after all. Bela Lugosi is Count Dracula. Well, that's all for now, dear listener. Thank you for coming with me on this journey. I hope you learned something. My name is Joey the Ghoul, and you've been listening to Icons from the Shadows. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and follow us on our socials at Ghouls of the Night, spelled N-I-T-E. You can find us on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Spotify, and Twitter. See you soon.